All right, so now I'll be joined by our distinguished guests. And come on up to the stage when I announce your name. Representative Jamie Raskin of Maryland. Sorry to catch you mid-bite. Secretary Brad Raffensperger of Georgia, who you've already heard from. And your seat's over there. And Kyung Law from CNN.
Good to see you.
I'll just briefly, Kyung, why don't you sit in the center? And then Brad, why don't you sit over here? Does that sound good?
Left to right.
No, that's not really. From their perspective, you're on the left, Secretary. So I'll just briefly say a few words about each of these people, each of whom I admire and respect a great deal. Kyung Law, many of you know if you've been watching CNN at all, she has been covering intimidation and threats levied against election officials since 2020 and the resilience they have in face of those challenges. She was probably, this is bringing up not so great memories for you, Kyung, but embedded down in Maricopa County during the Cyber Ninjas affair for many weeks down there, and we got to see firsthand, thanks to her reporting, some of the things that were going on and the election officials that were facing challenges due to the ongoing election denial in Arizona. Secretary Raffensperger, you've already heard from. He's Georgia's 29th Secretary of State, first elected in 2018 and overwhelmingly reelected in 2022. One very important note that we haven't talked about too much, but we alluded to briefly, Secretary Raffensperger oversaw Georgia's transition to an all-paper voting system in 2019 and 2020, the first time Georgians had voted in person with a paper ballot in 2 decades. Can you imagine for a moment what kind of disinformation would have been generated if Georgia was entirely digital without a paper record in 2020? And that's thanks to Secretary Raffensperger's leadership, the leadership of his team, and the work they did with county election officials in Georgia's 159 counties. So thank you. Yeah. Last but not least, Representative Jamie Raskin represents Maryland's 8th Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives. He serves as the ranking member of the House Committee on Oversight and Accountability in the 118th Congress and served as a member of the January 6th panel, which we all remember. I'll also say, I think everyone here in the room knows it, he just underwent successful treatments for cancer and rang the bell recently, and this is his first major event in public since then, and we're incredibly gratified to have him here. So please welcome all 3 of these individuals, and Kyung, I'll let you take it away from here.
It is my pleasure to be able to talk to 2 people who are so well known in this room, but also around the country for your defense of democracy and the American voter. I wanted to actually start by saying how many people here saw the article this weekend in the Washington Post talking about PTSD and Maricopa County's Supervisor Bill Gates. Right. It was an he is here, and as he has shown once again by talking about his personal trauma, the relentless attacks, and the impact of all of that on his life, that this is not an easy job, what these men do here and what you all do out there. And so I wanted to start by talking about trauma. January 2021, it was an incredible week for this country, and notably for these 2 people on stage. I want to start by talking to Representative Raskin. We know because of your book and your interviews, you experienced 2 unimaginable traumas. First, the loss of your son, Tommy. Our condolences. But also, you were inside the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. You wrote in your memoir, Unthinkable, I wasn't sure whether I was ever going to be able to do anything again. So to this room who has experienced, to varying degrees, what it's like trying to get up, what did it take for you to get up and to do the hard work of the impeachment and then the panel?
First of all, thank you for having me, and I've been separated from these guys for medical, not ideological purposes, I think, right? I've not been exiled over here, but I'm still a little bit immunodepressed. Well, yeah, in the book that you mentioned, the subtitle of that book is Trauma, Truth, and the Trials of American Democracy. So the kinds of trauma that I experienced, my family experienced, were actually being experienced by millions of people across the country in different ways, certainly the people in this room, but I ended up seeing all of it in the context of COVID-19 and what it did to our society, and then the assault on the truth and on democratic institutions and forms that took place. But the psychologists tell us that trauma means a violent demolition of all of your normal and rightful expectations about life. So what you think life is going to be like, we all walk around with assumptions like our children will always be there, or if there's an election, no matter how bitterly it's contested or how hard it's fought, that people will accept the results of the election and not attack the election administrators and not demonize them and, you know, level death threats against them and so on. All of these expectations were upset during that time. I mean, to go to my office, the capital of the United States, and to have it overrun by extremist gangs and fascists, all as part of an attempted coup against the election, constituted a major demolition, to say the least, of everything I expected of American democracy. So, you know, I imagine that the psychologists have different stages that people go through in trying to simulate it. But for me, I basically felt that there was no choice. And I was in a lot of internal communion with my son during that time, because that to me was the shattering trauma and remains the one in my life. But I knew how much Tommy loved human rights, and he loved democracy and freedom, and he wanted to see a lot more out of American democracy, not a lot less. So what else could I do?
So you turned to thoughts of Tommy to keep you going.
I did, and then I was buoyed by family and friends and constituents and people who just said, keep going. And so I believe that we are still in the fight of our lives. Alas, it's not over. We might just be in the middle of it right now, but we have to stand up every single day for the truth and for the formal structures and processes of democracy, because without them, we're lost.
Secretary Raffensperger, a significant week for you as well. That was the week that you had perhaps the most famous call in modern history. You were overnight then cast into a national figure, into national politics, and you had to stand as a Secretary of State between national politics and the Georgia voter. For the election workers in this room who've also, to some varying degrees, experienced a change in their lives, a change in their stature in their communities, what lessons do you have to share about how to go to the grocery store in peace?
Well, I think this job, I think as election worker, we swear an oath to the Constitution of our particular state and to the United States of America. And so our job is to follow the law and follow the Constitution. It's as simple as that. But then also, I think it takes, courage sometimes just to give people the truth. But I really think that the best thing we can do is try and do it as graceful and empathetic as possible. I think by now enough time has gone on. In fact, with that recent court case, which I mentioned earlier with Dominion versus Fox, when someone pays $787.5 million, you can tell which side really won that case. And then when there's actually findings of facts, when lawyers tell me all these terms, but there's actually facts that have been established and no one disputed those. So you know that the machines were accurate. So then you start just peeling the onion back. Then what was your issue? What is your issue? And that's really what you have to do, is so that people can come to grips with it. Because as a Republican, I agree for my party, because if we don't get our act together, we're going to lose another election. Now the other side may think, well, that's just fine. But and so I think that we have to, heal as fast as we can, and we have to understand that the building blocks, what the average person in America, the voters of America are looking for, is someone that's just going to be calm, sensible, truthful, be a person of good character. Someone that they actually could say, that person reminds me of the person I met down at the grocery store, at the soccer field with our kids, church group, in Aquinas, Rotary. But that's what people are looking for in America. I think they're looking for someone that they know that they can trust, because that is one of the building blocks, of really of a healthy society, and that's what we need to all try to move towards.
But that onion, as you peel it back, can really stink. and you saw that by testifying on the panel. You were on the other, in a different role on the panel. How do you maintain that calm and composure that we both witnessed from both of you as you were testifying and hearing?
Well, but I'd be interested to hear from Secretary Raffensperger about that, because the American case is, I don't know if it's unique, but it's rare, because in most industrialized nations, the role of election supervisor is one that is not occupied by partisans. And so, you look at Mexico or Canada, the people who run elections are not allowed to get involved in partisan politics. We have elections that are run by people who are openly partisan. And so for those who have integrity and honesty, like Secretary Raffensperger, it's a very difficult act of cognitive dissonance, where at some points you are just making the argument for your party, and at other points you are acting as the chief of the election and trying to make objective, dispassionate determinations about the elections. And that if I were in that situation, that would make me extremely nervous. Now, I mean, in some sense, all of us have to do that to participate in democratic elections in this strange new century we're in, because we got to go out and fight for our team. And we also have to stand up for the rules of the game, even if they don't favor us. And one of the hallmarks of fascist and authoritarian political parties is they don't accept the results of democratic elections if they don't go their way. And they embrace, or they refuse to disavow, violence as an instrument of obtaining political control. So when you've got a party that refuses to accept adverse election results and refuses to renounce violence, that's a party that's on a very rapid pathway to authoritarianism and fascism.
So yeah, how do you do that?
Well, I think that if you look at our results in Georgia, our governor, he was up for re-election, and he elected to run again, and so did I. And so we just traveled around the state. He did his events some part of the state, and I was in another part of the state, but we just really were engaging the voters. We realized that the voters decide these issues, and I leaned into the voters. See, I think the voters are smart. I think the voters figure this out. And so we just gave them the truth. And I think that, we do have, the one thing about the South, we have manners, and we're just very neighborly, and I think that's a good thing. And as people were neighborly back to us when you go out in all the towns throughout our entire state. But I think it's just really engaging the voters and talking to them and not shying away, not staying in your cocoon. You have to go out there and engage and in fact push back, but you push back with grace.
I have to give a plug to Palmetto, Georgia. That's where my in-laws are. We did not separate you two because of politics, but Representative Raskin, you are a Democrat, Secretary Raffensperger, a Republican. So, Congressman, you wrote, again, if I could turn to your book, that on the January 6th committee, we don't spend all our time in partisan polemics and food fights. Given the hyper-partisan nature of Washington and even at our state level, how the heck did you do that?
Well, Kevin McCarthy helped by boycotting the bipartisan committee that we had. But nonetheless, it was bipartisan. With our chairman being a Democrat from Mississippi, our vice chair being a Republican from Wyoming, and of course we had Adam Kinzinger too. So, people would say it's such an incredibly productive, effective committee. How are you doing it? And I think maybe when I wrote that or said that, it was in response to that point, because you remember, I mean, just to give you a little background, originally the GOP had advocated an independent 9/11 style commission outside with 5 Republicans and 5 Democrats and equal subpoena power, and we agreed to that. Benny Thompson was our negotiator later to become the chair of the committee, but we agreed to that. But when Donald Trump heard about it, he exercised a political veto, and he said he didn't want any investigation at all. They pulled the plug on their own proposal. At that point, Speaker Pelosi said, okay, we're going to do a House committee, a select committee to look at it. And as with all select committees, the Speaker would exercise final approval. There were Democrats and Republicans, but the people that, some of the people that McCarthy named to it, including Jim Jordan, who was clearly an actor in the events of January 6th and leading up to it, she vetoed and said, pick someone else. We don't want people who were directly involved or allegedly directly involved in coup planning activities and insurrectionary business. So at that point, McCarthy said, well, I'm not gonna appoint anybody else, but we were able to get, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger to participate. And the remarkable thing for me was it was by far the most bipartisan committee I'd ever been on, in that there were not polemics and constant, arguments and mutual denunciation the way that most committee and subcommittee hearings begin in the House of Representatives. It's just attacking the other side. Instead, we had a common project, which is to find out what happened and what was the truth. People say, well, it was really a partisan committee. And I say, well, it seems like it was partisan because the vast majority of the witnesses were Republicans, but in fact, there were some Democrats who testified too. But we had lots of witnesses from the White House, from the Trump family, and so on. And it was a fact-based inquiry. We had more than 1,000 witnesses. We had more than 100 subpoenaed witnesses. And we told the story to the whole world. Nothing cherry-picked or gerrymandered or skewed in any way. That's why I thought it was, I think it was a success in that we really advanced the story of what the truth was, and the country got to focus on what happened, because obviously most people weren't there that day, didn't see it. But we were able to make it real, and then we were able to connect it through the testimony of people like Secretary Raffensperger to the long-running effort by President Trump to undo the results of the election by going to the legislatures, by going to the election officials and the secretaries of state, by going to the Department of Justice, and then eventually going to the vice president, whose role under the Constitution and the 12th Amendment, of course, is a perfectly ministerial role. The purpose is just to oversee the proceeding, but they wanted to inflate his powers to the size of the Goodyear blimp and essentially put him in charge of anointing or appointing the next president. And to his great credit, Vice President Pence refused to do it, but then all hell broke loose, as Steve Bannon had been predicting earlier in the week it would.
But you call it a success, but Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney did pay a political price. So is this ammunition for Republicans to say it is too high a price to be involved in something like this?
Well, but I would let some Republicans opine on it. I mean, I think that Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger felt as if they could not live with themselves if they continued to participate in Trump's big lie. I imagine Secretary Raffensperger felt, despite the fact that he's a lifelong Republican, an active Republican, I think you had contributed even to the Trump campaign, I read that somewhere, that you could not go along with lies. So my dad once said that, somebody asked him, well, in the theocracies, the whole political system rests on a belief in God and the church and so on. So what does a democracy stand on? And he said, democracy must have a ground to stand on, and that ground is the truth.
So Secretary Raffensperger, you face the wrath of the Trump machine in your reelection after testifying before the committee.
Right.
Did you talk with aides and your family about all of this action that I took in defense of democracy, in defense of the Georgia voter, could cost me my job, will cost me donors. I'm going to seek re-election, but it is going to be tough.
Well, January 7th and 8th, we weren't talking about re-election. We were talking about survival, getting through this. We were in the wormhole being, twisted and shredded, but really never talked to my kids. Obviously, I talked to Tricia, my wife, but bit by bit, I knew that what really my kids respect me and respected the decisions I made. And I am so grateful for that, because you actually could have ruptured, that tie between your kids and myself for the rest of my life, because I would have done something that would have just been disrespectful. Just really, how do you describe that? Low behavior. And also, I can look at Tricia. Now, my grandkids, they love me no matter what. They don't know any better. But the most important thing in your life is your self-respect, because that's the person you look at in the mirror. And I just did a commencement address down in South Georgia, and I shared that with the students, because when you go out in life, you're going to get that challenge. It may not be the challenges that we had, or they had in Congress that day on January 6th, but someday you'll have some kind of a moral, challenge. You have to decide: are you going to take the right road, or are you going to take the easy road? And I would encourage everyone to always take the right road, because it's the road that it will give you peace. And that's so important, because when we look back on your life, to know that you did the right thing no matter how difficult it was. And you think then about how your parents raised you, the values that they put into you, invested in you. And it's not just your parents. And you think, where did my parents get those values? They got from their grandparents. Where'd they come from? This is these are eternal values, really, because they're good values. They're like, the Institute for Global Ethics. I wrote a book, and Coach Rick, he put in the back about the Institute for Global Ethics. And there's 5 universal values. And right up there is honesty, which is truth. You have to be able to do that, and then really to be compassionate. So that's being able to extend that truth with grace. And so that's really, I just put my head down, and I wasn't going to burden my kids with it. I probably burden my wife with it a little bit, just to kind of talk about it. But it was just, your phone is blowing up with threats and, all the other things that happen. But you just kind of know you're doing the right thing, because our decision was all based on the facts. We had the facts. And after the election, we had several weeks before leading up to that to just get more data points. In fact, Ryan Germany, our general counsel, former general counsel, but we were just collecting information. So we heard a new allegation. Oh, okay, there's 10,000 dead people. No, there's 5,000. No, there's 10,000. Okay, let's check that out. We had 2. Now we found 2 more, and I told the January 6th committee to adjust the record in my book. I think I told them my book was right. My letter to Congress was wrong. That's what it was. But we got it 4. And then I understand President Trump, his political allies, they paid over $500,000 for a report, and they said there's probably less than 25, and yet they were suing us on 5,000 and 10,000. But it's things like that. We had the facts, and when you have the facts, and you know what the Constitution is, you know what the rule of law is, then you just have to defend it.
Would you feel the same if you had lost? Would you be saying these exact same words if you had lost?
Yeah, because if I win, I win. If I lose, I win, because my job is just to do my job. And is to follow the law and follow the Constitution. The people get to decide, but people are smart and people are good. And that's what the people that, are grifting, is they don't really trust the people. You got to trust the people, because we're representative democracy. I think we used that term earlier, someone did. But let the people decide. You give them the facts. They always figure it out, and good always triumphs over evil. We won the Civil War. We won World War I. We won World War II. Good always triumphs evil. And so it will in this case too.
And while we're talking about the committee, Representative Raskin, do you believe that the committee did lay out a framework that will prompt the Department of Justice to act against Donald Trump?
Well, the framework we laid out, I think, was the one that Secretary Raffensperger just articulated, which is a system of elections that's based on the representative will. And in normal times, it's not that complicated. I mean, most people, nothing personal, but they don't think about election administration during normal times, right? I mean, they just count on it. Oh, I put my ballot in and it's going to be counted and it's all right. This was the election that proved that the people in this room are heroes because they are willing to stand up against every manner of violent threat and obscene insult and physical attack and screaming in their face and so on. It's in times of stress when we recognize how central the election administrative infrastructure is to make it happen. So I think that those who came and testified, there were a bunch of election officials who came in addition to Secretary Raffensperger at different levels, at the highest levels in the state, at the people who check you in and check off your name and the people who register voters, they came in. All of them were subject to a lot of taunting and insults and midnight hang-ups and death threats and so on, which is why the people in this room are heroes to me. But I think that the Department of Justice saw this was not a partisan food fight. This was an assault on constitutional democracy itself. Because if we don't have a neutral, objective electoral apparatus and structure, we don't have democracy.
Will we see charges
Will we see charges?
from the Department of Justice?
Well, let's start with this. I mean, there have been more than 1,000 arrests, hundreds of convictions. We have more than a dozen people who have been convicted already of seditious conspiracy, which means conspiracy to overthrow or put down the government of the United States, the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers.
Donald Trump?
Well, like I said at the very last hearing, I said ours is not a system where the foot soldiers and the mid-level ringleaders go to prison and the people at the top skate off free. I don't think that's what our system is. And, you know, if you're with Dr. King, you believe the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice in every case.
Well, Secretary Raffensperger, you spent 5 hours testifying before a different grand jury in Georgia, Fulton County. Charges are expected sometime this summer. Do you know when?
Well, yes, because the local DA put out, it was some date in June or July till some date in, I think, August or September. So it's in the paper. So
When are you taking vacation this summer?
I don't think she's charging me with anything. So I'm good.
Are you prepared?
I won't be in the middle of some boat up in the Great Lakes or Minnesota fly fishing, and I have nothing to worry about. But no, we don't consult with that. And my out is that I'm a structural engineer, and so I'll let the lawyers do what they do. I'll let the prosecutors do what they do. It is what it is.
Certainly there will be potentially backlash. Are you and your family prepared for that?
I don't think you prepare for it. It just kind of happens, and you just see what it looks like.
One of my favorite quotes, and it's going to really ring true, I think, for us here, is that history never repeats itself, but it often does rhyme. And we're certainly hearing a lot of the same tune as we enter 2024. I do want to know, from your perspective, Representative Raskin, having been inside the Capitol on January 6th, how concerned are you about, perhaps not a repeat of that, but violence?
Well, to me, it's scandalous that I've got colleagues who organized a visit to the DC jail and went and praised people who've been convicted of assaulting police officers with bats and sticks and other weapons, and have been convicted of it, and praised them as political prisoners and saying that they should be released. That's very dangerous game to play, to compare the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers to Andrei Sakharov or Nelson Mandela, or people who stood up for human rights and democracy against authoritarian and totalitarian regimes. All of this is an apology for violence. When Donald Trump goes out and he says that he is going to pardon the January 6th defendants and apologize to them, that is an attempt to whitewash the violence against our officers and the attempt to overthrow our constitutional democracy and the election in 2020. So am I afraid that there could be more violence? Of course I'm afraid, because it's been arrested and prosecuted and punished in many cases, but there's an effort by Donald Trump and his cult-like following to excuse the violence, to apologize for it, and that is what sets the stage for violence in the future.
And we're almost out of time, but do you have any concerns about violence, election intimidation, worker intimidation? Because people are exhausted.
It really bothers me when poll workers are threatened. They have no security whatsoever, so they're just out there. I really feel grateful that we live in Georgia, because in the 2022 cycle, it went very, very smooth. And I'm just praying that 2024 will be the same. I just think that these things all have a season, and sometimes you go through some dark seasons. But I'm very hopeful that we'll figure a path out. Also, I think I would encourage anyone, you start looking at electoral votes, how many you need. You need 271 to become the next president of the United States. So you look at, some states are going to definitely be on that side of the aisle, some are going to definitely be on that side. So you look at the ones that could be in play. And then what you need to do if you want to win, and that's what my party needs to say, who can win in those swing states? And that's why we hold our primary on Tuesday, March 12th, 2024. I said, whoever can win in Georgia will win nationally, because we are the bellwether state today. It is Georgia. It's not Ohio. That is gone. It's reliably Republican now. But we are a bellwether state. And if you can win in Georgia, you can win anywhere, and you will win nationally.
And can I just add to it, when we get to a national popular vote for president, which is supported by the vast majority of the public, every state will be a swing state, and every vote will count equally all over the country.
So I want to thank both of these gentlemen. Thank you very much.